Okay, let's look at a solution to problem 2. This was the problem. I gave you a tester class for a hypothetical new dog object, which you are to create a class that declares. So here I'm creating two dogs, Fido and Rex. It looks like Fido has the actual name Fido and is 23 years old. Rex has the name Rex, and we didn't give it an input here for age, so I don't know what the constructor looks like. Does it say? Looks like no. So it should have a constructor. Down here it says displays name Rex, age 0. So that implies to me that if I construct a dog without supplying an age, it will default to 0. Alright, so it looks like Fido should have a getAge method. So dogs in general should have a getAge method. They should have a method called sit, which presumably makes them sit. And then they have an isSitting method, which returns true or false for whether or not they're sitting. And it looks like stand. It seems like stand should stop them from sitting if they're already sitting, so it should set them not to be sitting. Cool, so that makes sense. Let's look at one of your answers. Here's an answer. So public class dog, that's great. Dogs need to have a name and an age, so this looks great. String name, string age. One minor problem here is, if you remember, I said it's generally good practice to make your fields private. So I would want to add the words private here. Okay, here we have a dog constructor, which takes a string and an int, and that looks great. Here comes the first problem. If this student had actually tried to use their dog class using this tester, it wouldn't have worked. It would have highlighted this in red, because this student doesn't have a constructor which can accept only a single string. They have a constructor which will accept 2 inputs. So the way to fix this problem is to create a second constructor that accepts a single string as input and sets age to be 0 by default. So now there are 2 constructors, and each constructor has a different argument list here, a different parameter list, that would match each of the possible ways it's being used in the tester here. Alright, another problem. Here's a main method. Totally inappropriate. If you remember, main methods are... There's only going to be one main method, usually, per project that you use, because this is where the JVM is going to start executing your code. A dog class is not actually a thing that you run directly. It's just a blueprint that describes what does it mean to be a dog object. So you don't really want a main method in there. Okay, he has getters and setters. That all looks fine. Although, strictly speaking, this is more than I asked for, because in here, I'm only ever using getAge. It looks like I don't use setAge. It looks like I don't getName or setName. But that's okay. Here's a toString. That's always a good idea. Okay, here's where it starts going a little bit wrong. So isSitting should return Boolean. That looks good. But here it just says return true. So this just returns true no matter what. Whereas it seems like, logically speaking, it would be nice to, like, if we'd said Fido.sit and then we ask, are you sitting? It should say true. But if we'd said Fido.stand and then we'd said, are you sitting, Fido? Presumably that should return false. So what that's telling me is we have another piece of information that we need to store about a dog's current state. We need to store whether or not the dog is sitting. So that should go up here. We should have private Boolean isSitting, or we could call it sitting. And you could construct this however you want, but I think we should have sitting be false for both constructors. Okay, that was like a really important key to this problem. Whenever you're making your own objects, a really important thing to think about is, do you need to add more fields? Would it be helpful to add more variables to store information in your class? So that's a question you should always be considering whenever you're making your own objects. Alright, so now that we've actually created a sitting variable that starts out as false, now sit and stand and isSitting make a lot more sense. Sit should set the dog's sitting variable to be true, because that's how the dog knows whether or not it's sitting. Just the same way that it knows that its age is whatever you tell it its age is. So here I set sitting to be true. In stand, I should set sitting to be false. We shouldn't have static here. I think I didn't actually review what static means in my videos, but static means that this method is run completely independently of any particular object. And that wouldn't make any sense in this case, because the whole point of this method is you're setting a particular dog to be sitting. So if I marked this as static, which means it runs independent of any objects, how is it that I'm going to set a particular object to be sitting? It doesn't make any sense. Usually static methods are sort of like helper methods or library methods. They're things that don't have to do with they're things that don't change the particular objects themselves. Examples of those are, you've already had some experience with the math library, where you say math.square root or math.random. Those are static methods, because you're not actually creating a specific number and then running a method on the number. You're not creating any kind of object. They're just helpful methods that are bundled together in a library called math. So that's generally one kind of situation where you do static. So we definitely don't want any of these to be static. Here, sit is setting sitting to true. Stand is setting sitting to be false. Both of them return void, which is great. So now is sitting shouldn't just always return true. It should return whether or not our dog is actually sitting, which is stored in the sitting variable. So now this looks like a much better solution.